Before the flood, when men's years were counted in centuries, a child was born who was different from all others in the line of Seth, son of Adam. His name was Enoch, and no one in his generation imagined that his life would end in a way the Bible would never fully explain. Enoch grew up in an age when wickedness was already spreading among the descendants of Cain, while Seth's godly line tried to keep the memory of the Creator alive. At 65 years old, Enoch had a son whom he named Methuselah, and it was right after that birth that the sacred text records a radical change in his life. Genesis states it with a brevity that puzzles scholars. Enoch walked with God for 300 years after fathering Methuselah. There are no wars, no recorded miracles, only that repeated phrase suggesting an intimacy with the divine that no patriarch before him had ever reached. Meanwhile, the earth filled with violence, and Cain's generations built cities, forged metal, and drifted further and further from reverence for their creator. Enoch, by contrast, became a living anomaly, a man who walked through corruption without being swept away by it. Later Jewish traditions, recorded in texts like the Book of Enoch, describe astonishing visions this man supposedly received during his lifetime. Those visions included journeys through the heavens, encounters with fallen angels, and revelations about the judgment that was coming upon humanity. Although these writings are not part of the biblical canon accepted by Jews and Christians, they were quoted in the Epistle of Jude in the New Testament. This shows that his figure left a deep mark on Israel's spiritual memory, long after his body vanished from the face of the earth. Jude directly quotes a prophecy attributed to Enoch, announcing that the Lord would come with thousands of his holy ones to execute judgment on all. This means a man who lived thousands of years before Christ was already speaking of a final judgment, a glorious coming, a separation between the righteous and the wicked. The question that torments scholars is how a mere mortal could have access to such knowledge, if not through direct and sustained communion with the divine. Enoch lived 365 years in total, a number many have linked symbolically to the days of the solar year. Scripture, however, does not offer that explanation explicitly, leaving the number as another detail wrapped in mystery. What is truly extraordinary is not how long he lived, but how his life ended, because the text does not say he died like the other patriarchs in that same chapter. The formula repeated for Adam, Seth, Enoch, and the rest is always the same. He lived, he fathered children, and he died. But when it is Enoch's turn, the Bible deliberately breaks that pattern and says something completely different from what was expected. He walked with God, and he vanished because God took him, with no illness, old age, or any known natural process involved. There is no mention of burial, no descendants weeping beside a family tomb, no farewell ritual recorded anywhere. Simply, one day Enoch was walking with God, and the next he was nowhere to be found on the earth known to his people. Ancient rabbis debated for centuries what that disappearance truly meant, and some even feared it was a sign of divine punishment, not blessing. Others strongly argued that Enoch had been carried alive into God's presence, becoming the first human being in history to experience such a thing. This happened centuries before the prophet Elijah would live through a similar ending, taken up to heaven in a chariot of fire before witnesses. The book of Hebrews in the New Testament resolves this ambiguity decisively by declaring that by faith Enoch was taken up so that he would not see death. The text adds that he was not found because God had taken him, a phrase that closes any doubt about whether he had simply fled or hidden. That word, translated in the original Greek, implies a change of place, a complete transition from an earthly state to a heavenly one. Imagine the scene his family and neighbors must have lived through when they first noticed his absence with no prior sign of farewell. They searched for his body in the fields, in his home, in every corner where he might have fallen ill, been injured, or been caught in a storm. They found nothing. No trace of clothing, no footprints leading to a corpse, no logical explanation to satisfy a community used to funerals and mourning rituals. Methuselah, his son, who would end up being the longest living man recorded in the entire Bible, had to grow up with the story of a father who simply vanished. It has been speculated that Methuselah's extraordinary longevity, 969 years, was tied to a divine promise about the timing of the flood. Tradition suggests that as long as Methuselah lived, the flood would not come, and his death coincides, according to genealogical calculations, with the exact year of Noah's flood. This connects Enoch's disappearance to a greater prophetic purpose, as if his removal had been a silent warning that judgment was approaching. The early church fathers, centuries later, revisited this story to argue that Enoch was a foreshadowing of the hope of resurrection. They saw him as a preview that death does not have the final word over those who faithfully walk with their Creator. Some apocryphal texts, though uninspired, went so far as to imagine Enoch as a heavenly messenger, a scribe of divine secrets. He was credited with the task of recording the sins of the fallen angels, who came down to earth before the flood, according to those extended traditions. These traditions directly influenced how Second Temple Jews understood the origin of evil in the ancient world. This explains why his name is quoted with such authority in the New Testament, despite not being part of the Torah in the strict sense. The absence of Enoch's tomb became, over the centuries, a powerful theological symbol for the communities that studied his story. It was tangible proof that there was something beyond death for those who lived in genuine obedience to the Creator. Unlike the patriarchs whose tombs became sites of pilgrimage and veneration, no ancient account mentions any supposed burial place for Enoch. No cave, no stone marked with his name, no shrine dedicated to honoring his remains has ever been mentioned in any historical source. This total absence of an earthly resting place still fuels fascinating questions today among historians, theologians, and archaeologists. Many have tried to trace any local tradition pointing to where Enoch might have lived his final days before vanishing completely. Some Ethiopian and Near Eastern traditions place his life in regions that today would correspond to parts of Mesopotamia, near the supposed location of Eden. None of this can be confirmed archaeologically, but the interest in locating any physical trace of Enoch has never fully disappeared. What remains constant across all sources is the idea of a man who broke the rules of mortality through the quality of his relationship with the divine. No spectacular miracles or legendary battles were needed for his story to become one of the most discussed in the entire Old Testament. Compared to Elijah, who centuries later would also be taken up to heaven without experiencing death, Enoch represents the first link in a unique biblical chain. This chain suggests that deep communion with God can alter the natural fate of the human body in ways that defy all known logic. This idea proved so powerful that it influenced later Jewish and Christian eschatology across generations of religious thinkers. It fueled expectations about what would happen to believers who were still alive at the moment of the Messiah's final return. The Apostle Paul himself, writing to the Thessalonians, describes a future event where living believers will be caught up without experiencing death. This passage is a direct and conscious echo of what had already happened to Enoch thousands of years before Paul wrote his letters. The Greek word Paul uses for that catching up shares a conceptual root with the word used in Hebrews to describe what happened to Enoch. This reinforces the theological connection between both episodes, separated by millennia but united by the same promise of transcending physical death. It is as if the disappearance of a single man at the dawn of humanity had been designed as a preview of something greater, a living proof that death is not the inevitable destiny for those who walk in genuine and constant faith before God. The brevity of the account in Genesis contrasts dramatically with the theological enormity of what it implies for all of later biblical history. That disproportion between how little is told and how much it means has fascinated readers for nearly 3,000 years. Modern scholars of the Hebrew text have noted that the grammatical construction used to describe Enoch's disappearance is unique in the entire Old Testament. There are no exact parallels in any other narrative passage of the Hebrew Bible describing a departure from this world in a similar way. This linguistic uniqueness reinforces the idea that ancient scribes fully understood they were recording an unprecedented event. They knew they were breaking the normal categories of life and death that governed the rest of the genealogical account in Genesis 5. During the Second Temple period, Jewish communities, including the Essenes of Qumran, showed particular fascination with the figure of Enoch. They produced and preserved multiple copies of texts attributed to him among the scrolls found near the Dead Sea in the last century. This shows that Enoch's disappearance was not a forgotten detail of biblical history, but an actively discussed mystery across generations. Human curiosity in the face of the inexplicable led people to credit Enoch with knowledge of astronomy, solar calendars, and the secrets of the universe. This turned him into an almost mythical figure within certain currents of ancient Jewish thought, far beyond the original account in Genesis. However, the canonical biblical text remains deliberately sober, refusing to fall into excessive speculation about these details. It limits itself to stating the essential, that he walked with God and that God took him without death ever touching him. This narrative sobriety, far from being a limitation, works as an open invitation for every generation of readers to reflect on their own faith. It invites the question of what it truly means to live in such deep communion with the Creator that death itself loses its power. For the first persecuted Christians, Enoch's story became a powerful comfort during the hardest times of persecution. It was proof that God could intervene in extraordinary ways to rescue the faithful from a fate that seemed unavoidable. Even today, among communities studying biblical eschatology, Enoch's case is still cited as the foundation for certain end-times doctrines. He is mentioned as the oldest precedent for a possible rapture of believers before a coming judgment upon the whole earth. The absence of a body makes Enoch one of the most puzzling cases in the entire ancient biblical record known to this day. The absence of a tomb adds another layer of mystery to a story that already defies all conventional explanation. And the absence of any medical or natural explanation closes the circle of an account that remains deliberately incomplete in its details. His story reminds us that, according to the testimony of Scripture, there was at least one man whose life did not end on earth. He continued in a place no human eye could witness or describe in words known to his generation or the ones that followed. Many preachers throughout the centuries have used his example to teach that walking constantly with God transforms a person's destiny. He was not a man who performed public miracles, but someone whose quiet, daily faithfulness ended up being rewarded in an extraordinary way. That quiet faithfulness contrasts with the louder stories of other biblical figures, which is why it goes unnoticed by many modern readers. Yet among students of biblical prophecy, few names generate as much debate as this patriarch who walked and vanished. His case is constantly used as an argument in discussions about the nature of the soul, the body, and what happens after physical death. Some theologians hold that his removal proves God can alter the natural laws of the human body whenever he sovereignly chooses to. Others prefer to see Enoch simply as a moral example, a figure teaching the importance of living in constant obedience. Whatever the interpretation, the biblical fact remains unchanged. There is no tomb, there is no body, and there is no recorded natural explanation. And that combination, nearly 3,000 years after it was first written, still raises the same unsettling question for every new reader. If God could take a man without death ever touching him, what does it truly mean even today to walk with him? That is the mystery no archaeology, no tradition, and no scholar has ever fully managed to solve to this day. And perhaps precisely because of that, Enoch's story remains one of the most discussed in the entire Old Testament,